On today's episode of the 1% Podcast, we are excited to welcome Dan Hardee to join us. Dan is widely considered one of the, if not the best family law attorney in the state of Idaho. We're going to be talking to Dan about families, marriages, divorce, custody, what patterns he's seen in people that make it, also what he's seen from other top performers, having had a number of attorneys working for him, having worked in large firms on large cases. Dan is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all things marriage, custody, prenuptial agreements, anything having to do with the law, and talking about positioning yourself either in preparation for or afterward, but also about his journey through law school and ultimately to being a successful owner and partner of a large successful firm here in Boise. So we're excited to have Dan on the podcast today. Our education system, in my opinion, is not built to help people thrive.
Yeah.
Right? Like it does what it's designed to do, and it makes most people docile and weak and doesn't help them to actually grow and to achieve something. Most people that choose to do that, it's because they're driven on their own, compelled reason from their family or just internally to want to go and to achieve more. So one comes in, and this is from a man, says, Dan, I'm in a marriage that feels emotionally dead, but I haven't pulled the trigger because I don't want to lose everything. What steps should I be taking, feeling like divorce is inevitable? And so I believe in marriage for that reason, for that purpose of investing in my kids and in the next generation, and what your life ultimately can be as you form that bond and that unity with someone that loves you and cares for you. And as I like to say to my wife, that, you know, I worship the ground that she walks on, and I hope that she worships the ground that I walk on. Dan Hardee, appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for taking your time. I know you're a busy guy, and especially, you know, in the world of law, when you're billing for your time is of the essence. So appreciate you making the sacrifice to be here with us.
Yeah,
so,
I appreciate that.
For those of you that don't know, Dan and I are friends. We've been friends for a while, and Dan's represented me in some cases. And Dan, I can say from personal experience, as well as from the experience of many other people, that Dan is one of the, if not certainly the best family law attorney in the state of Idaho, and you're very well respected as such. And so you've built a great reputation. So appreciate you being here with us to answer some questions today.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
of course.
So let's jump right in. Let's kind of talk. I always like letting people get to know our guests, like letting them get to know you at a personal level. So if you don't mind, let's just kind of talk about, like, where'd you grow up at? Mom, dad, family dynamics, home life growing up. What did that all look like?
Born in Pasadena, California. Moved here when I was really young. My dad was a builder, was in construction, much like you guys. And had two brothers growing up. One of them is practicing law with me. It's my partner, Greg. And grew up, went to Boyle High School, graduated in 86. Went to College of Idaho here in Caldwell. Played basketball there for 4 years, from 87 to 90. Had a great time there. Lived in Caldwell for 4 years, and then didn't really know what I wanted to do. Even as a senior in college, had an opportunity to take a job at ORIDA when ORIDA had a office here in Park Center. Don't know if you remember that, but
yeah,
had an office here, and then and I had an internship there before my senior year in marketing, in the marketing department, which was a great experience. And I got an offer after I graduated college, but I decided to pursue to get a law degree. So I went to University of Idaho from 90 to 92 and graduated early. I went to summer school, so I got out in 93. And now I'm married on my second marriage, so I have been through divorce, which I think helps a lot as an attorney when you've actually sat in the other side of the table. You know, it took me 14 months to get my divorce finalized. So even though I know all the tricks of the trade, so to speak, it still took me 14 months to get my divorce finalized. But I have 6 kids, 2 step kids. I got remarried and have been happily remarried for 8 years. And I think, let's see, I've got a son that's practicing with me that's 32, a daughter that's 29 that has her own She's a hairstylist and has her own business, doing very well. And then I have triplet daughters that are 21, about to graduate from Boise State. And then my youngest is 16, and then I have two step kids with my current wife, one that's 22 and one that's 16. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Awesome. Busy life, never a dull moment.
never a dull moment. Yeah.
So what was it you mentioned that you were thinking about working with ORIDA or possibly working into a marketing field after graduation from College of Idaho? What was it that made you decide to want to go into law? Did you have someone that kind of mentored you or gave you that idea? Did you
Yeah, good question. I was always interested in the law. I always, I think I was a big history buff, so I had a minor in history.
Okay.
We had a phenomenal professor at the College of Idaho named Howard Berger, who was just an unbelievable professor, and I took a lot of history courses. And one thing I learned that fascinated me was, the time when we had the war with England, the Revolutionary War, and all the framers of the Constitution, and how much courage it took for those guys to do that, knowing that they could be, hung for treason. And a lot of them were attorneys. So that kind of piqued my interest into the law. And the more I studied it, it was just something that really interested me. And then when I would talk to different adults that were faced with the decision of getting a master's degree or a law degree, the majority of them told me that they would recommend getting a law degree because you have more options with a law degree, So, and I think at the time when I worked at ORIDA, I was working in the downtown office, and I got to see firsthand all the politics that go on with it. And some people would rise through the ranks really not because they were more competent, but because they liked to golf with a boss every Saturday. And, a lot of that stuff, the politics and all the gossiping that was going on. And I just thought, man, I don't think I want to hitch myself to this wagon. And I'm kind of glad I did, because a year or two after I was offered the job, they ended up transferring to Pittsburgh. So they moved out of Idaho. So that in hindsight turned out to be a good choice. And then the other thing is, when I went to law school, I didn't like public speaking. Even doing this kind of interview would have caused me a lot of anxiety when I was 21. And so the thought of, being a lawyer like you see on TV or in movies was just something that I didn't think that I had the capacity to do at the time, when I'm a young man. And so I thought I was going to go get my law degree and then be the kind of attorney that, like an estate planning attorney, not the high conflict stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of ironic that I ended up getting into the highest conflict area in the law, which is, of course, family law. So,
yeah.
So that's been an interesting evolution, because I've changed quite a bit. I learned the hard way how to do these things.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you came out of law school and start practicing, and I'm sure it's different for everyone, but in some cases, people go to a specific practice that specializes in, whether it's estate planning or corporate law or transactions or whatever it is, real estate stuff. Talk about your path that way and how you got into specializing in family law and then kind of building expertise.
Yeah. So I graduated, I guess it was, I got done in 92, but technically my class didn't graduate till the spring of 93, but I was done in 92, which was nice because I graduated a little early. I was able to get a leg up on the interviews, because most people do graduate in May. So I was able to try to get out there, but I was pretty young. I was the youngest person in my class. I think the average age back in 1992 of law student was 30. And in law school, you have 120 people in your class, and they rank you. They rank you from 1 to 120. And so I'm dating myself here a bit, but back when we used to have bulletin boards, and things, when I was walking down the halls of the University of Idaho Law School, they would have advertisements for job listings, and it would say top 10% only, top 25% only. So if you're looking at getting one of the better paying jobs, you needed to do well, with your academic rank. So So it's a lot of pressure, and I think being the youngest one, the only work I had on my resume was doing construction work for my father during the summers, because I played college basketball and we weren't allowed to work during the school year. So, um, so when I got out of law school, I was 23, but I looked like I was 20, So when I would interview for these jobs, it was, I could tell that might not be, that wasn't an advantage for me. Secondly, a lot of the bigger firms in town at the time wanted attorneys who had clerked for a district court judge, for example. So that was the suggestion that I had when I would interview with the bigger firms. But ultimately, I decided to take a job with a firm in Caldwell called White Peterson. Terry White was a longtime attorney, and he was the city attorney for the city of Nampa. And then Bill Gray III was the city attorney for Caldwell. So I took a job with them, and I worked there about 4 years, but I wasn't really advancing my interests. I was just doing work for other people, wasn't really advancing my clientele. So after 4 years of that, I moved to Boise and joined a firm. But the issue is when you're, at the time I was 26, 27, you can't get a lot of work for businesses or companies because who wants to hire a young attorney that doesn't have a lot of experience, So it's hard to get that kind of work. So the main work I could get at the time was family law and criminal defense. So I started doing a little bit of that. When I was at White Peterson, I did the firm that I was with had the city contract with the city of Caldwell to prosecute all their misdemeanors. So I did that for 4 years. I prosecuted people for any kind of misdemeanor, all the misdemeanors on the books, really. And so I got a lot of trial experience doing that, which was helpful. And again, overcoming the anxiety of speaking in front of a room full of people and all that. And so then when I moved to Boise, I started doing a lot of family law. But unfortunately, I didn't really have another attorney there that did a lot of that. So I kind of had to learn on my own.
Yeah.
And that's, so I can remember some very trying moments, for example, when they had the old courthouse before this current courthouse that we have that we've been to recently. They had the old one, and so I would go there, and there would be, back in that time, you only had like 3 or 4 family law attorneys or judges, excuse me. They only had 3 or 4 family law judges. So when you would go over and have a hearing, for example, there would be, the courtroom would be full. There would be 8 or 10 attorneys there waiting for their case to be called. It was like a big cattle call. And so it could be really daunting and intimidating, as a young attorney when you don't really know what you're doing. So there were a lot of moments over there where, for example, I can remember one case where the judge said to me, "Well, Mr. Hardee, I'd really love to be able to make a ruling on your motion so that your client can get some visitation, but you didn't follow this procedure correctly. So I'd have to reset the hearing for 2 weeks, and that's a long walk out of the courtroom with your client when he hasn't seen his kids for a few weeks." So I learned a lot of lessons that way, but they're the kind of lessons that you don't soon forget, So I tell the young attorneys around my office all the time, it's really fortunate that they have older attorneys like my brother and myself that they can run something by just to make sure they're doing it the correct way. Because family law is kind of an interesting beast. We have statutes, we have case law, but most of the decisions that the judges make, they have so much discretion because they're just considering a different list of factors, right? So there's not like for child support, for example, we have a software program, and there's like 5 different data points that you enter, and then it spits out a number, right? But with the custody determinations, they just have a list of factors. So you could try a custody case in front of 5 different judges and potentially get 5 different results. In fact, if I was a betting man, which I am, I would say that you would get 5 different results. So it makes the practice much more difficult because you oftentimes can't give people the certainty that they're looking to.
Yeah. No, I love that. I say this almost every podcast, but the reason we call it the 1% podcast is not just becoming the top 1% in whatever your area of expertise is, which is part of it. And that's why, we want to have guests like you on here. But the other part of it is you talked about and just painted this picture of being a young attorney, being uncertain of yourself, being uncomfortable standing up and talking in front of people, graduating from law school, working to try and get a job and figuring out what that looked like to where you are today.
Yeah.
Right? Like, likely the most respected, if not one of the absolutely most respected family law attorneys in Idaho. And if you looking back on that now, right? Like looking from where you are now to looking back to 1992 or around that time, there's been a lot that's changed and transpired. Looking back and knowing what you know now, what would be advice that you would give maybe to your younger self or to someone else that's in a similar position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about this actually before because once I got my practice going, and I think family law is kind of a unique subset of practice for lawyers, because I think the longer you do it, the more referral sources you get, and hopefully if you're doing a good job, the thing about family law is that you can do a great job for somebody, and but they might not know it, right? Because they don't have the breadth of knowledge or experience to know what a good job is or what a good result is, right? Yeah. So a lot of it is really subjective, but hopefully if you're doing a good job for most of your clients, you're going to build up a lot of referral sources, and so you're going to have more work, and so you hire, you want to hire some associates to grow, and so when I hired a few associates, some work out, some don't. But what I've learned over the years is that the best thing that I think you can do as a young attorney is just to try to learn as well as you can from observing other attorneys doing it. So, for example, they have hearings every week, and you can go sit in on those hearings and watch them in real time. A variety of different issues being presented, so you can learn a lot from older attorneys. I've tried to offer my services to younger attorneys around town or less experienced attorneys. I've offered to be a mentor to them because I've had some older attorneys that have mentored me, like Stan Welsh, Scott Ludwig, Matt Gustavo is a good friend of mine. He and I converse often. But I think the most important thing is just making sure that you're very familiar with the statutes and the cases and the procedures and the way that the judges like things to be done. And then the most important thing, I think, is to tell your clients to always tell the truth. It's just some basic things that when you're going through a divorce, a lot of people will want to, present false, testimony, or I've even had some clients, doctors, chiropractors, things like that, suggest that we, modify, I'll say the word modify, some documents that may make them look bad, which of course we don't do. Yeah. We don't do that. But so I think that's the most important thing. But yeah, when I look back on it, I think the most important part is just to be extremely well prepared.
The separations and the preparation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a lot of like what Coach Danielson says. It's all about the preparation. Usually when you try a case, and I think I've even shared this with you before, but when you're putting on a trial, we have court trials. So that's one important thing a lot of people don't know is with divorce cases, you don't have a jury, it's a court trial in front of a judge. So if we do have trials, and I'd say we'd have trials on maybe 5% of the cases that I have, most of them settle. But the ones that you do have to try, in my experience at least, there's other components to it. For example, one party may have a personality disorder. There might be there's a lot of emotional baggage with divorce. So sometimes people are trying cases out of spite or vindictiveness, not because it makes any financial sense to do it, because trials can be very expensive. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah. So we reached out to our audience about filling them in that you were coming on the podcast and asked for questions, and we got a number of them, and so I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get through all of them in the time that we have, but I'll just kind of start asking you some. Yeah. One that was kind of a recurring theme, it was phrased in a few different ways, but if you were to give one piece of advice to keep people from ever needing to come into your office, basically need to preserve their marriages, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to people married?
Yeah, that's a great question. Boy, that's a tough one. I would say, I think the number one thing I'd say is that people have a hard time with difficult discussions. right? So, and I think because they don't want to upset their partner, so they have difficulty sometimes addressing things that need to be addressed. And I think that most people, including myself at times, are uncomfortable in dealing with high conflict in their personal relationships. Like, I have no problem being as aggressive as I need to be when I'm representing a client. But sometimes, if you've got an issue of conflict with one of your children or a close friend or your wife, it's not as easy, right? So I think having open communication about the difficult issues is one. I think part of the problem is that we don't educate our kids through our educational system. If we would educate our children about some of the the skills that would serve them well in relationships, we don't really teach them about financial management. We don't really teach them about, hey, how to get on the same page, about how many kids do we want to have, or how are we going to parent our kids? How are we going to make decisions moving forward? Are we both going to work, or is it just one of us going to work? How's that going to look like? And so all those, and then of course, I think what makes marriage really tough is that everything is always changing, right? We're changing. Yeah. We grow. Sometimes our views on politics or religion change. So everything is constantly changing around us. Your employment status changes.
The world around
finances,
like things like
politics.
It didn't used to exist. Yeah. Now you're having to learn how to navigate things.
Exactly.
Technology is very different.
Yeah. I would say, number one, I think the older I've gotten, the more I would say that loyalty is the number one value that people have to have in a marriage. And loyalty doesn't mean just being faithful. Loyalty means, always having your partner's back, being there for them, trying to help them achieve whatever goals or aspirations they have, being unselfish, all the things that everybody knows, but is difficult sometimes to implement.
I could not agree with you more on the basis of education and helping to develop skills. Our education system, in my opinion, is not built to help people thrive.
Yeah.
Right. Like it does what it's designed to do, and it makes most people docile and weak, and it doesn't help them to actually grow and to achieve something. Most people that choose to do that, it's because they're driven on their own, compelled for the reason from their family or just internally to want to go and to achieve more. But we spend more time learning the Pythagorean theorem or learning about 17th century English literature than we do about financial literacy or about developing skills and how to communicate, how to address difficult problems, like how to, I guess, seemingly win friends and influence people. Yeah. And those are all skills that are important, and in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the statistics, and I get a lot of these pamphlets every month, and in my firm, Hardee, Piñol Kracke, we have 9 attorneys and I think 16 paralegals, and so we try to meet occasionally and go through some of this stuff. But the recent ones I saw is that the divorce rate in the United States right now is 56%. And the interesting thing is that of the people that do get divorced, 86% get remarried within 5 years. And so when you really look at it, the amount of money that people spend on divorces is astronomical. I mean, part of the reason is I think a lot of people quite naturally, I think, accuse attorneys of exacerbating conflict, because the more conflict there is, the more they get paid, right? And I totally understand that perception. It's hard not to feel that way sometimes myself when I'm dealing with these cases with some attorneys. But, I do think on the other hand, we're not, the parties themselves need to take some responsibility for that as well, because the problem is that, like I said, the great majority of these cases should resolve. And I think oftentimes if cases aren't resolved, it is the attorney's fault, or at least one of them. I mean, because I think most cases should resolve, but there are issues that are extremely difficult or novel, or you get some issues that are just so highly emotionally charged that sometimes people just need to have a trial, and so I never
for closure.
Yeah, I think for closure, I think there's a lot of misperceptions about trials. I think a lot of times, I get the sense from a client, either whether it's mine or the other party, that they really want to have a trial so that the judge will say, you are the bad person, that your husband is the bad person, or you're the good person, he's the bad person. So you win, that's really not
almost something they like see on a movie or something, right? Which, as I've gone through life experience and you get involved in different forms of litigation.
Yeah.
I remember like going back and you see TV shows or movies about trials, and it's like, courtrooms are nothing like that.
No, it's very
interactions or nothing like that.
Yeah, it's not. The trials that we have, it basically boils down to three things, right? In every divorce, I mean, assuming you're dealing with a couple with kids, it can get a little overwhelming because there's just so much information. With some of these marriages, I've represented people that they've been married 30 years and then you have about every issue under the sun, right? I mean, they can't agree on how to divide up their personal property. They can't agree on how to divide up their assets. They can't agree on who's going to get the house, so they literally can't agree on anything. They can't agree on custody, a visitation schedule. So, but it really boils down to three things. When we get ready to prepare for a trial, you've got a parenting plan that outlines the custody schedule that your client wants. You've got child support calculations that those are based on the incomes of the parties. What's the custody schedule? Who pays the health insurance for the kids? Who gets the tax credit? And then it's going to spit out a number, right? And we don't have any control over that. So, but the courts are required to follow the child support guidelines, unless there's good cause to deviate from them. So, usually, it used to be parties could negotiate that. I had cases in the early 90s in Caldwell where, maybe a guy's making, say, $300,000 back then, which is a lot more today, but let's say he's making $300,000 and wife is a stay-at-home mom and dad's pressing for 50-50, not because he necessarily wants 50-50, but he doesn't want to pay a lot of child support, right? In this hypothetical.
Yeah.
And mom is really concerned about how am I going to make it, without his financial support, but I don't want him to have 50-50. So people used to negotiate, and let's say the child support would be $2,000 a month. Somebody might say, well, if you agree that I get primary custody, I'll only make you, pay me $1,000 a month. And most of the time back then, the judges, they didn't care. But then a case went up to the Supreme Court. So now they say the child support is for the child. So we're not going to let people do that. You're going to follow the guidelines and it's going to be complied with unless you can prove there's good cause, But so you have custody, child support, and then we got to divide up the property. So you got the property debt. So really you have three main exhibits. You have the parenting plan, the child support calculations, and then the property debt schedule that outlines, what it is that you're asking, how you want the assets and debts divided. But it's much more business-like, and I've only had one case in 32 years where at the conclusion of a case, a judge made a comment like that where he was kind of making a pronouncement on which party was good and which party was bad. I've only had one. And at the end of that case, and fortunately I was on the right side of the facts of that case, but I represented the husband. And the judge came out with his decision and said, I can't find any fault with your client, Mr. Hardee. And I put 100% of the responsibility for these current circumstances on the respondent, on his ex-wife. So, but that doesn't happen very often. So I think people are looking for that validation. They're never going to get it through the divorce process.
So we just talked about what do you feel like is the number one thing that would keep people away from getting a divorce? This may seem similar, but on the opposite side of the coin, what is the number one contributing factor that you see that contributes to people?
Yeah, that's a great flip. I would say the great majority of it is, I've kind of defined it this way, that I think what really leads to the divorce is when people can't stay connected at the level they need to for long enough periods of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think in order to have a happy marriage, you need to stay connected to your partner. And when there's distance because of fighting or not confronting the other person with issues, and so resentment starts to build in. But as soon as you get to the contempt level in a relationship where one person really has a contempt for the other and is harboring a lot of resentment, that's when things, according to the experts that I've consulted with, that's usually when things go off the rails. And so people want to blame, infidelity or financial issues. And I do agree those are a big component of it, certainly. But usually those happen after they lose that connection.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that when people are courting or dating, they'll do things for their partner that they stop doing after they get married, right? And you have to keep working at it, And I have to remind myself that every day, you need to work on your relationship. And because I have so many kids, sometimes I'm working so much that I'm not nurturing the most important relationship in my life, which is my wife. Yeah. And so even I am struggling with that.
Even if they're well intended, right? You're trying to spend time with your kids, be it their things.
It's really hard,
I balance all those plans.
It's really hard, right? I mean, everybody can identify with the fact that it's hard nowadays because most couples out there don't have the ability to just have one person work. So both people have to work, right? So now you're both working, you're raising kids, you're trying to maintain relationships with your family of origin, like your parents, sisters, brothers, friends, and it's just a real challenge, And then I think the other contributing factor is, I have 5 daughters, and they're always on those phones, right? And so those phones add another component because I think these social media things get in the way of a real connection with people.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, let's jump to some of the questions given to us by the audience. So one comes in, this is from a man, says, Dan, I'm in a marriage that feels emotionally dead, but I haven't pulled the trigger because I don't want to lose everything. What steps should I be taking, feeling like divorce is inevitable?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been there. I actually was in that situation, my first marriage. So I really identify with this guy. And what I would tell him is the first thing I would do would be to prepare, an inventory of your assets and debts. Be as honest as you can. But the most important thing is that they're honest with their attorney, because we can't really help somebody if they're not being fully honest about that. And I could tell you a funny story about that. But I would say that that he should consult with an attorney. He consult with a good family law attorney and create an inventory of his assets and debts. And if he's got kids, think about the kind of schedule that you want and why. The most important thing is to be honest about what schedule is in the best interest of your kids. And I'll tell you that, it used to be that when we, in Ada County at least, they when you would get a divorce, they had these packets that they would give people when they went to the parenting class. It was like a little workbook. And they would have different suggested visitation schedules based on the age of the child. And most of those were based on this theory that whichever parent was primarily bonded to the children should have primary custody. That's the way we did it for a number of years. That at the time of the divorce, let's say you had 2 kids that were 6 and 3, and mom had been a stay-at-home mom. Mom would always get primary custody, back in the day, because of that attachment theory. Whoever parents primarily bonded, then that person should have.
So Dad Murphy will say dad's earning an income for the family. Mom was able to be a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. So back in the 90s, for example, that's what you'd be looking at is, and it wasn't as bad as what our dads had to deal with, the one night a week every the weekend, but it wasn't 50-50. And then they did a lot of research. There was a associate professor from University of Arizona that started looking into this. And he said, well, where did that come from? Does anybody done any empirical studies on whether, this bonding stuff, is there any merit to that? And he found that there hadn't been a lot of studies on it. So he started doing studies on kids who were the product of divorce. And he did a lot of research. And I think the overwhelming view, when you look at these family law associations of experts, child psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, attorneys, other people that are in that field, that the overwhelming view now is that the best opportunity for kids to reach the best versions of themselves is if they have a healthy connection to both parents. And usually that's with some form of shared custody, which is usually defined anywhere between 35 and 50%, of the overnights on a yearly basis. So now I think the presumption in Idaho under the statute is joint custody, but that doesn't mean 50-50. But my feeling is that unless you've got one of the trio signs of, like, say, alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, if you don't really have any of those present, then I think usually the presumption is 50-50, unless you've got some other kind of weird quirk like mental illness, or, you're dealing with a 6-month-old or something. But if you've got kids over 3, I think right now the presumption is 50-50 custody. And that would make sense because now, I think in the 60s or 70s, there weren't as many women as men in the workforce, but now I think there are more women than men in the workforce. So now both parties are working. So now it doesn't really apply, this, because they're both working full time.
Yeah.
So I think you're seeing dads get a lot more equitable custody schedules than they were, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Our next question comes from a female. She says, I stayed in a marriage for the kids, but I don't feel safe emotionally. What does the law say about mental and emotional abuse, and when it comes to custody or protecting your rights during a divorce?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a really good question, because a lot of times people will throw abuse around a lot, and there's a definition of what domestic abuse is under the Idaho Code, and it is what you think about. It is physical. Domestic violence. The definition is, an unlawful touching, right? You touching somebody without their consent, slap, push, spit, whatever. That's kind of the domestic violence stuff. And that stuff, actually, if you, in Idaho, there's 2 types of custody. There's legal custody, which is the decision-making over your children. What school do they go to? Do they get the vaccines? That kind of stuff. And then there's physical custody. What's the schedule? When is the kid with mom? When is the kid with dad? With legal custody, if you can prove that your spouse has committed more than one act of domestic violence against you, and that usually means he's been charged with it, or you've reported it to the police, and maybe he wasn't charged for some reason, but you have sufficient evidence to prove it in a court of law. For a criminal conviction, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, but in family law, in civil courts, it's by a preponderance of the evidence. So if you can convince the court by 51% that your spouse has committed more than one act of domestic violence against you during your marriage, then the presumption is the presumption of joint legal custody is overcome. And it's also a factor into physical custody. If you look at the physical custody factors, one of them is whether domestic violence was present during the marriage. As I understand her question, she's talking about more verbal and emotional abuse. And to that, I would say that has really come to the forefront in the last 3 to 5 years. In other words, it used to be that if it was just, yelling, cursing, that kind of thing, well, you'd kind of just say, well, that's a lot of marriages that end in divorce, right? But when you have, there's a new term that came out the last several years that's really come to prominence recently. It's called intimate partner violence. So I would advise this particular person to Google intimate partner violence. And what it really is when you have one of the spouses that's using control tactics within the marriage to manipulate the other person, maybe using finances, but there's manipulative control tactics. If it's severe enough, it can be the basis for awarding her, in this hypothetical, primary custody. But the difficult thing is proving it. There was a Tom Cruise line in a movie that says, it doesn't matter what the truth is, it matters what I can prove. So to that person, I would say that she should try to get some recordings of some of this manipulative, emotional, and verbal abuse. Because when you get into a court of law and it's just your word versus the other person's, that can be difficult when you carry the burden of proof. So a lot of times you have to get evidence of that, and sometimes the only evidence that you can get is getting a recording of them. But it is a factor, and if you need to get a good attorney that is experienced in dealing with intimate partner violence, and then in that kind of situation, sometimes you'll want to get a parenting time evaluation, which is when you get an expert to interview the parties. They do some psych and personality testing. They visit with the kids in their office. Then they'll interview the kids at mom's house. They'll interview the kids at dad's house. They'll take collateral evidence, emails, texts, recordings. They review any evidence you have, and then they make a recommendation on what they think is in the best interest of the kids. And so for somebody in that position, that would be the route that I would recommend that she go.
Yeah. Next one, this is from a male, why does it seem like the system is stacked against fathers? Are there real protections for dads who want joint custody, or is it still a losing battle? I think he kind of hit on
Yeah, I think I did. I think it's a different world now. So for some reason out in the community, I still hear that sometimes. And I think that's probably just unique. But there's always, when I hear those stories, when I start asking questions of them, then I'll always unwind the mystery as to why that happened. And usually it's because of something that they've done, that separate them from the others. But I would say, for the most part, when I kind of crack up when I hear these commercials from some attorneys that say, we specialize in representing men. Yeah. Because men are getting the raw deal. I don't see that. I think that men are treated fairly by the judges in Ada County and Kenyon County when it comes to custody at the present time.
Yeah. This is from a female. I'm financially dependent on my husband, and I'm scared that if I leave, I won't be able to support my kids. What should a woman in my position know about their legal and financial rights?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I would say what you want to do is consult with an experienced divorce attorney about that issue. It's really going to be fact specific to her situation. In Idaho, the presumption is that all the property they've acquired during the marriage is community, and the presumption is it'll be divided equally. But if you can prove that there are compelling circumstances, the court can award her more of the assets. So sometimes the courts can award her 60% of the assets, make him take more of the debt. They also have spousal maintenance. And this is one of those situations I was talking about earlier where spousal maintenance is a difficult one to answer because it's just a list of factors. But essentially, if she can prove that she doesn't have the ability to support herself through employment, and she doesn't have the ability to support herself through her share of the assets from the divorce, and he has the ability to pay it, then sometimes the court will award spousal maintenance. It's usually real rehabilitative, designed to kind of get her back on her feet and out in the workforce. But my advice to her, the first question I'd ask her is, well, what's your education? What's your work history? How much can you make? And then what I typically do is have them prepare a post-divorce budget based on what it's going to cost them to live, reasonably close to the same standard of living they enjoyed during the marriage. Figure out what they could contribute to that through getting a job. And then you evaluate their assets and debts, how much your husband makes, in order to determine whether or not you have a good case to get alimony or an unequal division in addition to child support.
And it seems like this is something that weighs on, I know a number of different people that are in that situation, right? Like where they're not happy in their marriage, but they basically stay married. The two top excuses are either, number one, we're staying together for the kids, or number two, I can't support myself on my own and I don't want to go get a job, or I don't want to, be dependent.
Yeah. And I think it's so fact specific that's why it's important that she go consult with an attorney, because the answer depends on all these other factors we've been talking about and the specific facts of her case. Yeah. I've had some people come and see me, and it's really sad. I've had some people come and see me that, they're just miserable. But they're in a very difficult situation. I had one woman come to me recently, and they've been married 32 years. And unbeknownst to her, her husband had been spending just an incredible amount of money on webcam girls and pornography. And he had spent 6 figures on it, and it had really cut into their assets. And she's left with, there's just little options. If people come to you and they don't have much, there's not a whole lot the judge can do. Yeah. So, there's some very, very difficult situations. It's extremely difficult when somebody comes to me in that situation and they say, I've got to get out of this marriage. But because of their financial situation, there aren't any easy answers for some of them.
Yeah. This is an interesting one. I'm 21 years old and I'm not married. I own a business and would like to start other businesses in the future. Do you think prenups are just for the wealthy, or should someone just starting out like me get a prenup before I get married?
That is a great question. I think it kind of depends. The typical situation you see a prenup in is when, let's say myself, I'm 56 years old. So if I was single and I'm going to get married. When you look at it from my perspective, this hypothetical, it took me, 38 years to get to this point. So if I get married tomorrow and now this person can start under the Idaho law, once you're married, all my income is community. So she's entitled to half of all my income, but it's taken me 38 years to get here.
Yeah.
So no business partnership would think that was fair, right? If you took me on as a partner in your construction business, you've got all these years in it, and I'm going to start making the same amount as you. Yeah. So that doesn't really seem fair to a lot of people. The flip side is, like in my situation, my wife had a great job at the time we got married. She was making very good money working at St. Luke's, and but we had 6 kids between us. I have a set of triplets. She had a daughter the same age, so we had 4 kids the same age. Our youngest 2 kids are the same age. That's a lot. Yeah. And even though we had 50-50 custody, or close to it in my situation, she had 50-50. I had about 42% at the time, but that's a lot, So, and we did both work for a period of time. And then I asked my wife if she would consider not working, because the other thing is I'm getting older, you want to travel a little more. Yeah. Well, most jobs, you only get 2 weeks. So that you can't really travel, because usually you take 1 week off around Christmas, right? So then you only get 1 week to travel. So it makes it really difficult. But you can see why in my situation, if I had a prenup and I'm asking my wife to stay at home, then if we get a divorce in 10 years, she's going to get nothing. That doesn't seem fair. So my suggestion to people in that kind of situation is try to put her in the same position she would be in had you not gotten married. So if she was making, let's say, $60,000 a year, she had a 401k and a pension, well, you could talk to an accountant who could help you figure out, well, where would that be in 10 years? What would be a reasonable approximation of how much she'd have in her 401k, how much she'd have in her pension, where she would be in terms of gaining equity in a house. So there's a lot of ways that you can do that to try to make it fair. Yeah. When you're 21, if you're smart, the way you set up your business, the thing for that person, I would say, is that, number one, all the property that you own prior to marriage remains your separate property, unless he would do something to change that. So if he's created all these businesses before marriage, it would be okay if as long as he doesn't commingle it with community assets, as long as he respects the separate legal entity of his businesses and doesn't merge the business and the personal, right? So like some people will have business accounts, they'll just run everything out of it, the business and their personal, right? So that's not good. Yeah. So you want to keep your business stuff separate from your personal stuff, number one. Number two, it would be a good idea for him, because if he expands his business, so I guess Scott Dunn negotiated a case that was very difficult, because this client owned 10% in a number of businesses that his parents owned, right? And then when his father passed away, they purchased it from their mother. And so they have all these businesses. Well, he got married kind of in the middle of all this. And then after marriage, the business that he owned prior to marriage purchased about 100 different other businesses, or set up a bunch of other locations for their business. So that can get pretty complex and difficult. So it would always be a good idea to execute a prenup if you can, because if you don't execute a prenup, then the minute you're married, everything that you own is community. So all the assets you acquire is presumed to be community. The only exceptions are property you own prior to marriage is separate. Inheritances are separate, as long as you don't commingle them. And anything you got by gift is separate, to kind of give you a general overview. But so if you have a prenup, you can contract out of the statutory law in Idaho. You can contract out of community property. So a lot of people don't realize this, but income from separate property is community. Okay, so if you own your own business, let's say, and you take a distribution, you pay we get a salary. Let's say you have your own business, you take a salary, and then you take draws, right? We call them draws or distributions. So that would make up your income. So the community, if you don't have a prenup, your income from your separate property would still be community. So you can draft a prenup where the income from your separate property remains community. It's kind of
or remains separate.
Remains separate. Yeah. Excuse me. Yes. Thank you. So it's kind of a mine, yours, and ours when you do a prenup, right? This stuff is mine and will remain mine. That stuff is yours and will remain yours. And then these things will be ours. So you can draft a prenup that says, look, if we buy a house together, that'll be ours. If we have a joint account, that'll be ours. But these accounts are separate. These businesses are separate. This house is separate. But hey, if we buy a house and both the names on the deed, then it'll be ours. So that's generally why it's a good idea to do a prenup in any situation when you get married.
Yeah. Interesting. This was on. What are the biggest mistakes you see families make when it comes to estate planning or trust setup, especially when there are blended families involved?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I'm not an estate planning attorney, so I'd have to probably kick that one to an estate planning attorney. But what I will say is what I do know is that, I did a little bit of that stuff, and I remember sitting in a conference room with these three middle-aged women who were fighting over the jewelry that their mother had left them. And I just thought, wow, that's, just almost getting into a fist fight. So I think it's better to always do a will, and you want to be very clear about, what your intent is and who gets what, so that you can avoid as much of that conflict after the fact.
Yeah. This one comes from a female. If a parent has been falsely accused of abuse or neglect, what are the real chances of clearing their name, and what is the first step you should take?
Yeah, good question. Those are really difficult. Unfortunately, there certainly are cases where people will falsify abuse to gain leverage in a custody case, and I see it all too often. And it's very, 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 it can be very devastating to the person who's being falsely accused. I had a case about 15 years ago out in Caldwell where this young guy had a baby out of marriage with another woman, and they had a young baby. I think it was 6 months at the time, and it was very high conflict. She was a difficult one to deal with, and I advised him not to go over to her house alone. And I advise a lot of clients in high conflict situations to never be alone with the baby mama or the baby daddy if there's conflict issues or prior abuse. He went over there, and they got into a verbal argument, and he left, and he swore up and down he never touched her, and he woke up early the next day with a boot to the back of his head, and he was arrested for felony. And she had alleged that he had taken a wine bottle off her mantle, a full bottle of wine that was still sealed, and taken it by the neck and stood above her while she was crouching, and she'd held her arm up. And her story was that he had taken that wine bottle and brought it down to hit her, and it hit her arm, and it broke over her arm. Okay. And then she had these marks on her arm. And I thought, there's no way that would happen. There's no way in my view, that a 130-pound woman could put her arm up and a full bottle of wine that's coming down on her arm is going to break. So we also, we examined it, but the police immediately arrested him. He didn't get to see his child for a year. We got forensic experts to prove that it never could have happened the way that she alleged that it happened. And so he finally got cleared with his defense attorney. But it cost him $30,000 to defend himself. And unfortunately, when we went to the police, I went to the police with him to try to get them to charge her with filing a false criminal complaint. And they refused to do it. They weren't interested. So I think it's unfortunate. I understand that they have limited resources, but when somebody falsely accuses a person of a heinous act like that, and they end up having to spend $30,000 on it, there should be a remedy for that.
Yeah.
That person should be prosecuted, because not only is it damaging to that person, but it's also damaging to the real victims of that kind of violence.
Well, and that would be perjury too, right? Like lying.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just unbelievable. That case, coincidentally, when I later represented him in his custody modification, because he was represented by different counsel at the time that the initial stuff was going down, and was told by his attorney at the time that he should just agree to give her sole legal and physical custody because of these pending criminal charges, which I thought was a bad move. So when he got done with that, he came to me for a second opinion, and then we ended up filing a petition to modify. But interestingly, when I was deposing this woman, it was really clear to me that she was a pathological liar, not only because of what she'd done previously, but when I'm deposing her, I'm just asking her some background questions. Where did you go to college? What's your work experience? And she just volunteered that she went to Idaho State on a full ride basketball scholarship and played basketball on the team for the Idaho State women's team, which is really easy to check.
Yeah.
So I made a couple calls. I got the program. I talked to the head coach. No record of her playing basketball for the team. No record of her attending Idaho State. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But that was the person that the police believed and pressed charges against my client who had unbelievable consequences. But he's got 50-50 custody of his daughter now, and he sends me a text every Christmas. So I've been able to see her grow up. And I think she's 16 now. So, but yeah.
I would, insert here that this is one of the reasons why it is so important. I'll toot your horn for you for a minute. That's part of the reason why it's so important that you hire a really good, competent, high-level attorney if you're in a situation like this.
Yes, absolutely.
Because, the separation's in the preparation, right? Like someone else could have been deposing her and could have just taken what she said at face value and been like, oh, okay, cool, great. And then just kind of moved on to the next questions. And say, well, sorry, bud, this is what it is. And you're just going to have to deal with this. But you were willing to jump in and dive in and do the homework and figure out that she was, in fact,
absolutely
lying, which I'm sure had to have carried weight in how the rest of her testimony was viewed.
Yeah, and I think that exposing the, I tell clients all the time when they come in to see me, I tell them the most important thing is tell the truth, be credible about everything. And I think that really helps. I've had judges give us feedback that, if you've got a client that's made mistakes, admit to them and let's talk about what you're doing to correct it and make sure it doesn't happen again, rather than lie about it or embellish it. You need to admit what you did and be held accountable. Hey, that wasn't me in my best moment. I just had a hearing the other day in front of a judge in Ada County, and it was a temporary custody issue about what custody schedule they were going to do during the summers. They couldn't agree on it. He wanted week on, week off, which is what the judges typically do. She just wanted him to have, 2 overnights every week. Okay, so we had to have a hearing about it. And one of the things that she had submitted with her declaration is a couple examples of his text communications to her that weren't painting him in the best light. And in his response, to his credit, he said, hey, I was having a really bad day. I've been really overwhelmed. I didn't want a divorce. I didn't want to not be able to see my kids every day. And when she hit me with this, I was having a really bad day. So it wasn't me at my best. I'm going to do better. And the judge mentioned that in his ruling. And one of the reasons that he gave my client, not everything he wanted, but most of what he wanted, he cited that as the reason that not only had he, admitted that he had done wrong, took accountability for it, promised to do better, but he is also taking some parenting courses and reading some books for self-improvement. And I think so. Some of that's common sense, right?
Yeah.
But that's one thing I'd tell anybody going through a divorce.
Yeah. This next question, I guess in a way, makes me proud. So it kind of shows a little bit of the demographic of people that we have listening and watching. Says Dan, I'm in my late 20s, not married yet, but I'm building a business. My income potential could be significant down the road. Would you recommend putting a prenuptial agreement in place, maybe even running all future earnings through a separate entity or trust to protect myself in case of a divorce later on? Does this actually hold up, or is it just wishful thinking?
Yeah,
That's a really good question.
That is a great question. And I would say, there's a lot of things. What I would tell somebody to do in that situation is the first thing you should do is find yourself a good CPA that is familiar with family law, and there's a few good ones out there that I use routinely. Because if you're really smart about the way that you set up your businesses and then what you do after your marriage, you can keep a lot of that separate, right? You want to keep all your bank accounts separate. Don't merge the personal with the business. Don't sign deeds. A lot of people want to own a house prior to marriage, for example, and then after marriage go get a refinance. A lot of these banks say, well, you got to add her name to the deed now that you're married. Not And the person doesn't understand that, oh, by adding her to the deed, I may have just given her half of the equity in this house, right? So there's some things you can do to minimize that, but I think it's always a good idea to get a prenup because you can contract. Really, you can agree to whatever you want in terms of keeping your assets separate, keeping her assets separate, and then defining exactly what will be ours. Okay, and usually those will hold up unless there's some kind of duress or fraud. So you need to tell the truth, right? So you need to, with a prenup, you need to disclose what your assets are at the time of the marriage. So if you don't fraudulently disclose all your assets, then it might get set aside. If you hit your wife to be with the prenup the day before the marriage, that might be a situation that creates a problem, right? Because there's some duress there. I think that the main thing is that when I have somebody, like if I represented this young man, I would advise him to ensure that his fiancée has her own attorney. So she gets independent legal advice and then she's fairly represented, right? Because she's got her own attorney. At least,
Yeah.
That's the hope. But I always tell people that if you're going to do a prenup, you want your soon-to-be spouse to have their own attorney. And then you want to think about what kind of foundation you're laying for your marriage, So I would just tell him that you want to make sure that if you're going to get married and that you want to be fair to your spouse, right? I mean, you want to be generous and fair to her so that if you do get a divorce, that, she's going to be in a better position than she would have been, if she would have stayed with her job, right? To go back to that example.
Yeah. You brought up one thing about homes, and I heard a clip from Dave Ramsey a little while back. He had like an attorney as a guest on his panel during his show, and someone had called in. I had a friend going through a similar thing, and so thought I'd get your take on this. That he said that one of the most overlooked issues in divorces is that they don't, let's say like the wife is going to stay in the house, that the husband doesn't get his name off the deed.
Yeah.
So then later on, if the wife goes to refinance the house or she's going to stay in it and she'll just continue making the payments or whatever. But then if she decides to not continue making payments, then this is ultimately going to come back on him.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of problems. We see this all the time with people that represent themselves, So a lot of people would do a divorce without an attorney. And what I would tell people is there's a lot of times people will come and consult with me and I'll say, hey, you don't need to hire me. You guys don't have any kids. You don't have a lot of assets. You can go down to the court assistance program there at the courthouse. I think Canyon County offers the same thing, and they'll give you the forms with the instructions. So I tell them, why don't you go fill all that out and then come in to see me and I'll help you fill it out. And then you can make sure that the only document that really matters is the judgment, the decree of divorce, which is the document that grants you the divorce and then sets forth the responsibilities of the parties. So we'll get a lot of people that will think that, well, let's say they both are on the deed at the time of the divorce and they're both on the mortgage. They'll think, well, if I just, maybe the husband thinks the plan is, the intent for the parties is that wife would keep the house, right? And that wife's going to get his name off the loan, right? If she's going to keep the house, she needs to get his name off the loan. A lot of people think a quitclaim deed will do that. That doesn't have anything to do with the loan, right? The quitclaim deed is just the title, like a title to your car. It just tells people who the owner is. So if the wife, in that situation, if the husband signs the deed, all that's doing is now he doesn't own the house anymore. She's the only owner of the house, but he's still on the mortgage. So I've had that happen to me at least 20 times where somebody will come into me and say, hey, she was supposed to refinance the house or my name was supposed to get off the loan, but it's still showing up on my credit. And I tried to get a car loan and it's showing that I'm on the hook for this mortgage. And I said, well, did she refinance the mortgage? No, but I signed a deed, So you always have to make sure that there's some language in the judgment or the decree that says that if the wife is keeping the home, that she's got so much time to refinance it, and if she can't refinance it, then she's got to sell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all about the language. So I tell people, look, if you've got something like, a house issue, or you've got custody, or you've got any kind of substantial assets, you really should go see an attorney. It's not a sales job. It's just, I've seen so many people that if they spent even $1,000 or $500 or sometimes even less with consulting with an attorney and letting them review some things, it would have saved them 100 times that down the road. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here today. A lot of what we've talked about has been, I guess maybe I'll say, somewhat negative, right? We're talking about the repercussions or things that happen, or the challenges that come with it. I think that both you and I share the same belief in the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
So, one to kind of wrap up, but do so on a positive note. Obviously, having been through a divorce yourself and choosing to be remarried, I'm a believer in the institution of marriage because of what it can afford you. And I think that we see more and more now today, probably more than ever, where men in particular are apprehensive about wanting to get married.
Yes.
Because they see all those negative challenges. I have buddies that I grew up with whose parents went through a divorce. Their dad got the every other weekend type thing and was decimated financially. And so you see a lot of people that grew up either in those circumstances or around those circumstances, and they're disenchanted with the idea of marriage. I believe in the institution of marriage because of what it affords, not only to the individual partners, if it can be executed in an ideal setting or close to ideal setting, but also the impact of kids. And I think the impact on kids is the most important part. Kids need a stable, healthy situation to grow up in. And I believe that the best way of achieving that is by having a mother and a father present, which may not always be the biological mother or father, but by having a stable family situation, that kids bring more joy than anything in life. Like, the greatest fulfillment I have in my life is nothing that I've ever done outside. It's within the walls of my own home, right? Like my family, my kids are what bring me more joy than anything. And so I believe in marriage for that reason, for that purpose of investing in my kids and in the next generation, and what your life ultimately can be as you form that bond and that unity with someone that loves you and cares for you. And as I like to say to my wife, that, I worship the ground that she walks on, and I hope that she worships the ground that I walk on. Talk to us really quickly about, all this negative and that you see every day, right? You live in this world.
Yeah.
Talk to us about your belief in the institution of marriage and why you feel like it is important and the impact that it has on.
Yeah, I think for the reasons you've said is exactly right. I there's nothing better for me than being able to go home to my best friend every night. I mean, I tell my wife it's pretty cool. We get to have a sleepover every night. I mean, when we were kids growing up, how much did you love having to be able to spend a night with your buddies? And I get to spend the night with my best friend every night, and I really appreciate my wife's support, because I think being a family law lawyer has got to be one of the more challenging jobs that are out there. I mean, it is extremely, extremely challenging. I think that most people can understand why, but it's I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have my wife's support, both emotionally and all the help that she gives me with my kids. And a lot of the credit that I get for being a father with my kids is due to the ideas and execution that my wife does on my behalf. So, and being able to keep your house running and have peace and being able to do all the things that you want to do for your kids, it's extremely important to have that. I think that, like you said, I mean, I think all the evidence says that the kids that have a healthy connection to both parents, I mean, it's really important. It doesn't, I don't think, have to be under the same household, but as long as you do have that healthy connection, and then if they can have a healthy connection with their step parents as well, that's just an added benefit to it. But I definitely think that the family unit's important, and marriage as an institution is important. And it's something that, it obviously didn't dissuade me from remarrying, because I'm a big believer that it can be the best way to live. It could be the healthiest way to live, I think. And I don't have any question that if I wasn't married, that I wouldn't be operating as healthy as I am now. I don't think there's any question about that. You'd probably agree with that.
Yeah.
To become the best version of yourself, you need a partner on the same level. And my wife is very intelligent, and I think having that is a huge advantage, because if you have somebody that's honest with you, they're gonna tell you when you're out of line. They're gonna tell you when you're not paying attention to the right things, and that's important to have, right? If you have people around you that are just sycophants, you're not going to get any better. They're just telling you what you want to hear. So honesty and having somebody that's going to give you feedback when you need it is invaluable. It's all maybe some of it's luck, maybe it's some of it's different opportunities in terms of the partner that you select, but the selection process is a big piece of it.
Yeah.
But I don't really have any great advice to give anybody. The one thing I will say that's really important as a parent is what I've heard from most of the experts is it's not so much what we say to our kids or tell our kids, it's what we do that matters. So it's actions over words. So I think that with my kids, the best thing that I try to do in terms of leading by example is with the work ethic, because I do think that's, it's funny that when you and I grew up, work ethic was a positive attribute, right? And it seems to be getting reframed by some in our society, that people that work a lot or demand their employees to work a lot. And by a lot, I mean Monday through Friday, but if you really want to be great at something, you can't be average, so you're going to have to work more than what other people think is hard work. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that I've tried to emphasize on my kids is if you want to be successful, there's no shortcuts. You have to put in the work. Yeah. Right. So that's the main thing I try to,
Love it. No, Dan, it's been a pleasure to have you. Appreciate all your wisdom that you shared with us. Hopefully our guests and everyone watching and those that submitted questions got answers to their questions. How can people reach you if someone wants to get in touch with you, if someone wants to come consult with you or do a meeting with you? What's the best way for them to contact you?
If anybody wants to get a hold of me, they can Google my name and they'll get our phone number. Hardee, Piñol, and Kracke. We're over in Boise. We're right up the hill from Boise State, Big Jed's Burgers. If anybody knows where that is, we're right up the hill from that. And we have a nice office over there. It's off of Overland in Vista, right around that area. But we've got 9 full-time attorneys. They're welcome to call and schedule an appointment with me or any of the attorneys that we have there. And I think I would just tell anybody, if you're thinking about getting a divorce, the best thing to do is to consult with a good family law attorney and have that consult. Number one, it's attorney-client privilege. We don't send anything to your house. Nobody's going to know about it unless you tell them. But we keep that confidentiality is extremely important. So they can come and sit down with us for an hour and a half. And usually in that amount of time, I can give them the answers that they need to make the best decision that they need to make for themselves.
Love it. Dan, you're awesome. Appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks, buddy.
Yep.